Hello and welcome to the Barcast. I'm your host, Nick Barr, coming to you on a cold but sunny Tuesday here in New York. I'm in a different room and a different chair, but we'll manage anyway. And today we're wrapping up the two with self-preservation two, whose keyword is privilege. So I'm getting a little bit reflective. We're now reaching the very end of this project, and I looked back, and it's been 8 months since I started. So we started with the four, we're wrapping up the two, and then we'll finish with the three. And it's a good reminder that you start something and you don't know kind of how big the project will be. And this translation project, has turned out to be a pretty huge undertaking and a very beautiful one. I think I really liked publishing these videos, and relatively few people have engaged with them. I've lost subscribers on Substack because I don't think people were expecting or asking for a 27-part translation of a very deep Enneagram book. But I was sort of aware that this probably isn't going to be interesting to people. But I felt kind of, I was interested in the experiment. Like, I wonder if anyone will listen to this. And there have been people who have listened to it. And I know that the few of us who are interested in this work have found Naranjo's writing to be very helpful. And so it's kind of cool to be the one to translate it into English for the first time. There's a very active Reddit community about the Enneagram, and I know that they've done like a kind of a Google Translate translation. But this will be the first genuine, high quality translation into English. And most importantly for me, there's just been this great accountability structure, and it's required me to dig deep with my own attention and really engage the material on a profound level. And it's absolutely shaping my own understanding of the Enneagram and how I coach and how I work with other people. So I don't know what's next for the project. I'm thinking about that right now. That's part of the reason I'm going slower, is I'm thinking about what's next. I'm thinking about doing an interview series along the same lines as this project, which was Naranjo hands over each chapter to a person or committee of people who identify as the type. And I think that's evergreen. I love, from my own work with Enneagram, I love hearing from firsthand accounts. When I help people type themselves, I always point them to accounts written by or interviews with people of that type. I think that's the best way to learn the numbers. Anyway, let's get into it. Privilege is the keyword for the self-preservation too. And Naranjo says, in the case of the conservation type, seduction can be compared to that of a child toward their parents. Just as the social type appears big, this is someone who is perceived as small, childlike in their attitudes and even in their physical traits. Just as the social two seems hyper-adult, over-mature, and the sexual two, like Bizet's Carmen, appears as a force of nature, wild, the conservation two comes across as tender and childlike. It's probably a good. So you've got sort of the big social two, the wild sexual two, and then the childlike self-preservation two. But other than those presentation layers, I think that the subtypes of the two aren't that different. Let's learn more. Precisely for this reason, psychoanalysts have referred to this as a childlike character. Ichaso used the phrase "me, the most important" to describe this type's neurotic need, which I initially misunderstood as referring to the Napoleonic attitude of someone puffing out their chest. Finally, I came to understand that, unlike the ambition-driven need for importance, this "me, the most important" of the conservation type refers to childlike egocentrism, which is a desire to be the center of attention without having to achieve importance through qualifications, accomplishments, or feats. A child wants to be loved, not for this or that, but simply because they exist as they are, for who they are. So a very important concept here. It's like it's an evil twin um, of what we all deserve, which is to be loved for who we are. But for the childlike it's love me exactly for who I am. Don't find fault with me. My mere existence is sort of worthy of adoration and love. So this me, the most important, is the egocentrism of a child who wants to be the center of attention. The most prominent characteristic of this human type, then, is the need for love, a bare need for love, not obtained through sexual seduction or the self-importance of the social type. So just love me for who I am. Why don't you just love me for who I am? That kind of need for love, not for what I've done, which we'll get into with the 3. In the case of the 2, not for how helpful I am or how great I am at work or a great mother. Not any kind of seductive quality, but just that bare love, that bare need for love. So why might a person feel the need to remain childlike or to act like a child? Naturally, there's some advantage in it. Children are more likable than adults. Babies are very attractive to people with a maternal disposition. We could say that childlike traits themselves are seductive. There's a scientific word for that, neoteny, I think, neotenic. Babies are very attractive to people with a maternal disposition. Childlike traits themselves are seductive, and the neurotic need of this human type is to seduce through childlikeness, which implies a need for tenderness, delicacy, and fragility, even though it also involves egocentrism and an avoidance of responsibilities. So this is the Transformation essay by Katy Preciado. I don't want to grow up. I believe the most difficult part of the transformation process is growing up, maturing, and accepting that I'm no longer a child who's forgiven for everything because of ignorance, innocence, or whim, living on pampering, privileges, and comforts as a right and just because. Leaving childhood and adolescence behind has been a difficult task. I've been in love with my image as a young girl throughout my entire life, an image that has seduced me, enchanted me, and that I have allowed to direct most of my life. My attachment to the childlike aspects of my personality is more than a preference or fixation. It is a way of life, a lifestyle where responsibilities never rested on me or my decisions, but rather on circumstances, others, or the randomness of life. I think it was in the introduction to the 2 that Naranjo talks about, being the golden child next, at the right hand of God or Jesus or some holy authority figure. And so, the self-preservation 2 is over-identifying with the child at the right hand, the golden child energy. Whereas you'll also find some 2s over-identifying with the pride of the deity. Growing up is a process that, looking back, I can describe as complicated, difficult, uncomfortable, but above all, unpleasant. Falling out of love with myself has been the most important and decisive task for maturing. This is perhaps why relationships only grow when they transcend the infatuation phase and move toward building love. Infatuation is an interesting word. Let's do a quick etymology hunt. Yeah, so the root is in foolishness, like fatuous. And so you make someone foolish. So, if the intent behind seduction is to make one completely absorbed in your sphere, there's an element of control and power in seduction. The need to infatuate, this more childlike need, and that's what we do as parents, right? We kind of become silly. We become infatuated with children, right? We become fools with children, and we look past their flaws. So it's a really powerful word, actually, this infatuation. So this is precisely what I've encountered, realizing that to grow, I must build myself, not based on the superficiality of my bad character habits, but on the bittersweet reality that constantly surrounds me. She talks about being still, being silent, entering a reality shared by others and myself, where I've been able to experience companionship, support, fear, the ability to confront my own ghosts, in addition to learning to ask for help. So, we have to be careful here. Wait, isn't a child always asking for help? Well, in a way, maybe, but and maybe we'll hear more about this, but I think that might be, again, sort of another evil twin where the help that unhealthy self-preservation too might ask for is the kind of codependent, could you lift this high thing up for me help? Not literally, right? But like, help me stay small. Whereas help me grow, that's the hard help for the two. Really help the real me, help my soul, as opposed to help my character, help my personality. Unlike an 8, right, where the 8's personality structure is such that they're not going to ask for any kind of help. Effort to tolerate frustration. I've only managed to achieve this condition by recognizing a profound sense of incapacity, ignorance, and laziness of being. Becoming a woman and growing up has meant acknowledging the need to connect and build relationships with other women as equals, as sisters, friends, mentors, and guides. It means integrating into the feminine world not only to cultivate seduction and persuasion, but also to connect with receptivity in the face of demand, with sensitivity in the face of insensitivity, with love in the face of dependency, with reality in the face of fantasy. Becoming a woman has also made me flesh and blood, flesh and bone. I don't just want to feel myself in relations to others, I also feel mortal, with age, with boundaries I didn't see before, in the arrogant heroism of my super powerful child self. That's a beautiful phrase. Arrogant heroism of my super powerful child self. Why super powerful? She continues, because I believed I could sit on the lap of Lucifer himself, or an all-powerful God, and I thought I could kiss them, charm them, make myself irresistible, and get whatever I wanted. I always felt I could handle anything, of course, anything that interested me. My unconscious surely protected me by steering me toward situations that didn't require great intellectual effort or special skills. My childlike charm was enough, along with the promise of offering unconditional love, like that of a child, without limits or barriers. Who could resist such an offer? I remember the feeling of being like some kind of beast tamer. When the other was angry or needed something, when conflict arose, there I was, almost willing to do anything, like an oasis in the desert for the thirsty, like a siren song in the middle of nowhere. Deep down, this was about needing the beast and its grotesque nature to minimize my own flaws, my deepest desires and needs. Clearly, my own beast would ultimately end up dominating me. So the self-preservation too sort of the beast is they're not me. I can't be the beast, and so the beast has to be externalized onto another, and then that's a comfortable place for the self-preservation too to be. That's the Lucifer, who they can pacify, charm, infatuate, etc. So it's not easy, taming the beast, but it's easy for self-preservation too. But of course, that leads to its own set of problems that maybe we'll hear in this account. My search began when I became fed up with living at my parents' house at 21 years old, freshly graduated from psychology school. I found a job, got my own apartment. My fantasy was finally be free. A few months later, I began to feel depressed. I gained almost 20 kilos. The feeling of loneliness and having to take care of myself filled me with anguish and dread, but I didn't dare confess all these feelings to anyone and lived through them in silence. However, I carried on with my plan to live alone. I hardly spent any time by myself, always had visitors or activities to keep me occupied. I asked my boyfriend at the time to move in with me, and he refused. That rejection left me feeling even more depressed, and I began to develop allergic reactions on my skin. Rejection, is painful for anybody, but particularly painful and terrifying and threatening for the self-preservation two, and the two in general, who needs to be needed. So when you get rejected as a two, that's existential. sick, I visited a dermatologist who said to me, "You're under a lot of stress. What's going on in your life?" Hearing that question felt like dying. An uncontrollable rage took over me, and I wanted to take it out on everyone, on my parents, my boyfriend, the world. I felt like yelling at everyone for not taking care of me. Life seemed overwhelmingly complicated, and I felt powerless in total crisis. Now I understand that beneath the rage, there was a deep pain, a sense of feeling unprotected, useless, insignificant, and devalued. That became evident when I moved out and lived on my own. She describes in more detail just living in a really rundown apartment, leaks, bugs, and she was just sort of completely desensitized to all of that. Took her a year to kind of escape that situation and start to kind of take over responsibility of her domain. My job at the time involved managing a clinic for terminally ill patients. Fulfilled my duties whenever I felt like it. I was consistently late. My starting time was at 8, but I commonly arrived after 10. She showed up. She called in sick. She used money inappropriately. This is when her search for herself began. My boyfriend at the time was a depressive young man who I felt I had to take care of. I was increasingly exhausted, and to cope, I threw myself into parties whenever I could, racked up debt, eating bread, chocolate, etc. A completely disordered lifestyle. I maintained an attitude of avoiding frustration at all costs, led to hyperactivity, surrounded by people who helped me stay distracted. I think the 2 is a... So if you have the 1 who's also hyperactive, but they're a little bit blended with like the 1 I think is going to be like the 1 is going to be more naturally a workaholic who's an activist staying late hours working on the cause, because the 1 is more aligned in a way. They need to be perfect, but they're connected with morality, so they throw themselves into just causes. And then you look at the 3 who can also be a workaholic, but they'll throw themselves into anything where they can succeed. So if you look at the polarity of the 1 and the 3, which is an interesting... I think the 1, 2, and 3 area, I think there's such strong polarization between the 1 and the 3. I see it over and over again with 2s I talk to, and of course, being married to a 2 helps a lot here. Sometimes I call her a 1, and sometimes you could call her a 3. She's really engaged with all 3 of those numbers. But I think the 2's hyperactivity in a way is being pulled between I should be working, like the moral busyness, and then the, call it sort of the marketing busyness, or the sort of I'm looking for a non... And I still haven't read the 3 chapters, but let's call it political busyness versus moral busyness. And I think the 2 almost gets caught in the tornado of busyness. And then, of course, the 2 is also social, so, hanging out with people. I guess what I want to say is the 3 is going to be conventionally successful because they're going to throw themselves into, I'll just call it politics, areas where they can achieve and be successful. Not literally politics necessarily. It could be entrepreneurial pursuits, business, even any kind of conventional career. And then the 1 is going to throw themselves into justice and moral causes. And the 2, I think, of those 3 things is going to throw themselves into a lot of stuff, but it's going to probably be the most disordered, most disorganized. So she begins a psychotherapy practice. that helps her. Today I realize that I can protect myself, be self-sufficient, contribute to my relationship. I feel less anxious and less preoccupied with what to do with myself. I feel committed to what I do, to my work, and to the simple things of daily life, like cooking or going for a walk. Life becomes simpler, less complicated. And the euphoria is gone too. I feel calm and can enjoy life without having overly high expectations of myself or others. I often find myself speaking the truth about what's happening to me, what I think, and what I feel. I never regained the weight I gained at 21. For me, this is a very concrete indicator of learning to control my compulsive eating habits. Another common thing with the two, and again, this binging, purging dynamic, you can hear in the Enneagram with the 1 and the 3 as well. The 3 wants it all, and the 1 I want to be careful not to kind of speak past my expertise, but like there just is something powerful, and internal family systems speaks more directly to this. But if you have a harsh inner critic on one side, and then sort of the rebelling teenager on the other side, you can see how a purging, binging cycle is likely to emerge from that. And there's something there with the 1 and the 3 and the 2 as well, the 2 being caught in the middle of that polarization. I also feel less burdensome. I always felt like an overwhelming, sticky person, like honey that can't be easily wiped away, a spoiled child constantly demanding affection, attention, and care. So interesting that pride, which is the passion of the 2, pride is sometimes described in Buddhist terminology as that sticky honey-like quality. That's the yellow color. That's the pride element, the golden sticky quality there. The way that honey is kind of proud, right? This sort of like rolling out. Honey has this way of kind of spreading itself over everything. Just interesting to see that mentioned. I see myself as lighter. I no longer feel perpetually like a child. Instead, I find myself desiring more adult things such as commitment, responsibility, or being present with another person without the usual selfishness of trying to gain something in return. I see myself understanding my parents' lives, and my demands on them have also diminished. Take myself more seriously. My voice matters because I'm a person, not because I'm special or because I always manage to get my way. Choosing situations I want to be involved in rather than compulsively offering myself at every moment just to remain the favorite. The biggest difference I notice now is that I think and decide for myself. I realize that I don't have complete control over my relationships. Instead, relationships are alive with their own dynamics, and their evolution depends on both people involved, or all the people if it's a group dynamic. I've entered the world of adult women. I see them as equals, and I'm aware of my competitiveness, complicity, envy, and admiration towards them. I recognize my intellectual laziness, my ignorance, and feel the emotional pain it causes me. I've learned to be with myself and also know the satisfaction of that. Working as a psychotherapist has helped me greatly. It's allowed me to feel useful, to serve a purpose that requires effort and discipline. She adds, establishing discipline and routines where limits exist, where I can't just do whatever I please, has been fundamental. Examples include attending psychotherapy consistently, keeping my home in order, organizing meals, eating at regular times, never skipping breakfast, taking my medications as prescribed, paying my credit card bills on time without accumulating debt, and so on. She continues. So the 2, if you get deeper in the Enneagram, the 2 is very connected with freedom. And it's a freedom that's earned through this kind of discipline. You see this over and over again. There's the false freedom of the 2 of sort of doing as they please, maybe a hedonistic kind of energy. And then there's the real freedom of establishing discipline and routines and finding freedom through that. I'm leaving behind an idealized childhood. I'm leaving behind endlessly lenient with myself, the fear of not being liked, the fear of not being charming. I'm leaving behind inefficiency. I'm letting go of the expectation that all my desires will be satisfied, of wanting to be unique and special. I'm letting go of the expectation that my family will be as I want them to be, the desire for them to love me the way that I want to be loved. Looking back, I see myself as a prisoner of my need to appear pretty and pleasant most of the time. I was trapped in my compulsion to please everyone, to give without truly seeing the other person. Which kind of keeps hitting death, fatigue, mortality, womanhood, more organization. It's been particularly helpful for me in my psychotherapy process, she says, to work with a woman. And she's talked about womanhood a lot. For type 2, the relationship with the mother often has a distorted dynamic, and reparenting myself through female psychotherapists became a very important step. That's an interesting way of putting it, a distorted dynamic. For self-preservation, too, it's important to recognize the extent to which the relationships are utilitarian, to see how they always involve an exchange of advantages and conveniences. The type 2 personality uses others and ends up being used by them, which eventually leaves them with a sense of being objectified or of seeing others as objects. Yeah, there is we talked about the criminal nature of the two before and the manipulative nature of the two. And the feeling of being used is core to the shame triad, 2, 3s, and 4s, the feeling triad, the heart triad. I mean, that's the essence of the 3 who, and we do it to ourselves. We have some experience or some felt bodily memory of potentially being manipulated or used in early childhood, but we take that on ourselves, starting with the 3 who kind of creates like a image and ends up pouring all their energy into the image, only to discover that, like, hey, despite this image's success, I still don't feel closer to meaning, closer to nourishment, closer to truth, closer to love. And the 2 has that as well, like whether you're a seducer or a child or an ambitious conqueror, there's an I-it relationship with your with your relationships. Your relationships enter that I-it phase, but it's different than the 7. The 2 and the 7 can be confused. I've seen them confused before. And the 7 also, has that schemer quality. But the 7 is really in contact with fear and survival and not getting trapped. So the 7 maybe will, why did I get off on this? The extent to which the relationships are utilitarian, like that could be said of the 7 as well. And the 7 might not realize it either at first. This exchange of advantages and conveniences, right? We talked about the car salesman, I think, came up in the 7. Alliance, mafia, complicity, which starts to touch into the 8. But those are in a way more kind of they're more of a pure form of survivorship. It's like, think about like if there were if there were some crisis in New York City, then your ability to survive would be contingent on the relationships that you've built up. That kind of mindset, like in order to survive, in order to thrive, in order to avoid pain, in order to avoid suffering, I must build alliances and relationships. That's more of the 7. And then you can feel the heart of the fear triad or the thinking triad there, right? Of like, it's more about security, survival, safety. And then the consequence of that can be guilt, because I recognize that there's a way that I'm using people to my own advantage, toward my own gain. With the 2 is using themselves as much as they use the other people. This is this reciprocal manipulation, reciprocal using. So it's more complicated, and it's more relational, and it's more core for the 2. The 2 uses others and ends up being used by them. And so then there's this feeling of being used up, of being manipulated, and a fear of being discarded, a fear of being abandoned, a fear of being rejected. That's much more at the heart of the feeling triads, like material to work with. I guess I should touch on the 4, since we've been talking about the feeling triad. The 4 is in most contact with this feeling of rejection. So the 2 is working very hard to make sure that never happens, by being indispensable to others, by the need to be needed. And we've talked about the various ways that 2s do that. The 3, as we'll learn, is deep down has a feeling of being discardable, and therefore demonstrates value through needs to demonstrate value, through achievement, through good work, through potentially being useful, again, like the 2. But they maybe aren't as in contact with that emptiness. The 2 and the 4 are more. It's a little bit more foregrounded for the 2 and the 4. The 3 being at the center of that triad is going to be more self-deceptive in this regard, and maybe genuinely thinks that conventional success is somehow going to be deeply meaningful to them, potentially to build stability for their family, or to make a difference in the world, or these kinds of things. And then the 4, at least this 4, I think worthlessness is taken as a given, and then kind of has to, what's sort of like a pitiable figure in film or literature, like just someone who has to work very hard just to kind of justify their existence. Like I almost have a character kind of course, I've talked about Lawrence of Arabia, but that's a more dramatic example. I'm thinking about a character who will do the most grotesque task for just pennies. That level of kind of impoverishment, that's core to the envy of the four. I'm all over the place in this one. From my experience, she says, I would recommend that a self-preservation to resist their tantrums when confronted by those who care about them, learning to stay and face things, to nurture the relationship with the other person. It's important to acknowledge the desire to control relationships and to understand how manipulation and lies are used to steer the other person where the two wants them to go. I suggest that the self-preservation two consider the cost of their childish behavior, what they lose every time they act like a child. They must see how this small form of power becomes a way of degrading themselves and ends up leaving them isolated. That's the heart of the passion there. You stay a child. And the small power is nothing compared to the freedom, ultimately, the freedom and responsibility and real control that, is a person's birthright. In therapeutic relationships, the self-preservation two is initially compliant, very affectionate, attempts to seduce the therapist with childlike charms. She's going into therapy stuff. In all cases, her clients who were twos were women. Self-preservation twos were women. What always strikes me are the reasons they give for seeking psychological help. In some cases, it's related to their romantic partner. Issue lies in the fact that their manipulations are no longer effective or they've been given an ultimatum. Often there's a problem with setting boundaries in the relationship. This manifests in behaviors such as spending family money irresponsibly or secretly, failing to keep agreements, feeling victimized by the partner without recognizing their own role in the conflict. Additionally, they often harbor the feeling that they're always giving more than their partner, more sex, more joy, more time, more dedication. Frequently observed significant difficulties in separating from their family of origin. These patients expend energy, money, and effort trying to get their family of origin to behave according to their wishes. Added to this is the fact that the self-preservation two often struggles with setting boundaries, leading to situations where their family of origin becomes more important than their current family. They also cannot relinquish control, needing to be the protagonist within their family of origin. As mothers, they find it difficult to act like adults and behave like children with their own children. There's a strong identification with the children's childhoods and a desire for them to live a life completely free from pain and suffering. She says, there's a honeymoon phase with a therapist, and then they tend to leave when things get tricky. They seek someone new who will pamper them, show them affection, and treat them as they wish. For the self-preservation two type, it is beneficial to be encouraged to experience what it feels like to stop being childish. And she's giving the self-preservation two a hard time, but keep in mind, remember, all these are written by the type. And you notice, one of the things you notice doing this work is like different types need different medicine. And I think there's a way that the two needs tough medicine. Their sin being pride, compared to, I think sixes need a different kind of medicine, as an example. Appreciation, permission. Those are medicines for the six. For all these reasons, what did she say? It's important to recognize their implacable childlike narcissism, to self-regulate. It is crucial for them to understand that everything they do ultimately leaves them without the ability to fend for themselves. They succeed in finding protectors, but they generally become enslaved to them in a utilitarian relationship, where the self-preservation two type feels privileged while suppressing their frustrations and personal desires. So it's essential to tell them the truth, to confront them despite their sweetness, that false sweetness that is merely the facade of a titanium armor built to shield them from an uncomfortable, hostile world they don't want to see or acknowledge. To transform, the two must accept constructive challenges that teach them to face the adult world, allowing them to confront it with the resources they genuinely possess, not with promises they fail to keep. It is necessary for them to understand how their whims not only fail to satisfy them, but also fuel their frustration. They need to see that acting childishly guarantees loneliness in their life, and that by avoiding effort, they remain stuck in immaturity, leaving them feeling useless. In summary, their path involves understanding their limits. This exploration offers a valuable experience of security and containment. So that's a self-preservation two, and we'll wrap up there. and start on the 3 next time. See you there.